So sometimes, like I said, this carburetor, I haven't touched it in 6 years. And I just recently pulled it off my small block about a week ago. And I'm getting ready to actually swap it to the big block. And here's something I forgot that I had actually done. And so initially I seated these down to 0. And wherever, once they fully seated, I know I marked in one of these positions here or here, which would have been the 0 mark when it's fully seated. This allows me to set this carburetor in quarter turn or half turn increments with these screws by indexing off of this line here or this line right here. These I just scratched in myself after I fully seated these needle screws down, and then brought them out, I don't know, 2 turns or 3 turns or whatever, 2 1/4 or 1 1/2 or whatever amount of turns it was calibrated for the idle. These are just idle screws. Now, if you bump your timing advance up and all of a sudden it starts to lean out and it's boggy, an example is it's idling, it's been warming up for, we'll say, 15, 20, 30 minutes of runtime just to warm it up. And then you just mash it straight to the floor. And then it goes kind of glug, 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 and it dies on you. It's because it's leaning out. So part of the reason it can be the accelerator pump might not be working, whatever, or lack of fuel pressure if there's a dirty fuel filter, or simply that the idle mixture was set in just a bit too lean. So a lot of times when we're tuning these, we have it turned out 2 or 3 turns, or 2 1/2 turns, 3 to 4 turns out, just to get it to idle, to get it to start, set base timing, just to get it to run. And then as you're setting the idle and you've already dialed in, I've already dialed in my timing advance where I wanted the timing advance to be, then sometimes these have to come out maybe a quarter turn, a half turn at a time, and then again thump it. And if it sits there and blip, 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 and it doesn't want to rev up, it's kind of going blip, 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 and it's kind of hesitating and it's sputtering and farting around, set it a little bit richer again and play with it a bit until it finally starts to kick up. Now, another thing they say is if the secondary air doors are opening too fast, there's a little bit of a myth bust to this. If it's opening too fast, it means it's leaning out, it's not getting fuel. Problem is, a lot of times these secondary fuel rods are not calibrated for sudden burst of fuel. It's tough to explain, but even like I've run these, I've sat beside these while I'm flooring it. Like, it's not like I'm driving a pickup truck or a car with the hood down. This is a motorhome. It's got a doghouse that comes off or an engine cover that comes off. So the thing is beside me, and I can run it down the road in gear, and I can watch what this is doing. This front vacuum brake, this will suck in to the diaphragm, right? And this stays sucked in while it's running. But as soon as you hit the floor, this one port right here, I don't know exactly what it does. I've never had these apart yet to really get right into the whole internals. But for whatever reason, as soon as you stick this to the floor, like mat it, this actually loses pressure or vacuum, and this diaphragm will actually back out. It'll let off as the butterflies are pulling down, and it'll open slow, And some people say, oh, you can't have this too loose. Don't have this too loose. Now you can see how I just a little tiny touch to make sure that this is actually fully closing, right? Just a little tiny touch, because sometimes you go and sometimes you go and you make the adjustments. Here, I'll play with this carburetor because it's a little bit. This carburetor is a little bit more used. This one sat for a long time, so she's kind of dry and crusty. I got to oil it up a little bit. But this one here, same thing, right? See, just a nice, just barely touches, little touches like that. But a lot of times when we set these up, we pop it down, then we go like this. And we go, okay, it's working. And then what happens is, you could get into a situation where it might stick. See right now, see how it just stuck just now? See how it's sticking? Then you rely on, you gotta, here, I'll just move that out of the way. Then you gotta rely on the engine to, I'm just trying to vibrate, make it vibrate to get it to, and it doesn't want to go. See how it sticks momentarily? Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I'm really hoping this has never been bent. So, the problem is I've been buying carburetors from the junkyards and from a couple of other places, and every carburetor has been monkeyed with by people that don't know what the fuck they're doing. And I only know, other than myself, I only know maybe 2 people who have more experience with the Rochester Quadrajet than myself. But in my generation, I am the expert. I have worked with nothing but Quadrajets. When it comes to other carburetors, Holleys, I never liked Dodge. My dad had a big block. Actually, my dad's had a couple of big block Chryslers and Dodge engines, and one of his engines had a Holley 2-barrel on it, and for whatever reason, I just never cared for it. I never liked it. And a lot of people say, oh, Holley's good and blah, blah, blah. And even a lot of the aftermarket carburetors are based on the Holley design. And there's a few little known good and bad little secrets about the Quadrajet, which is one of the reasons I don't want to part with these. I've never liked oval port carburetors. What I mean by oval port or square bore, the ones that have where the primaries and the secondaries appear to be the same size. So you get a little carburetor like a Holley, either a Holley or an Edelbrock, and it may claim to be a 750 CFM, but it's got the little primary and secondaries. They're little, right? And the overall top design of a square bore isn't big like this. This is a spread. This is called a spread bore. So you got small primaries, which are good for the fuel economy. You get a nicer idle with small primaries. Nice idle, good bottom end, right? Bottom end to mid range. Then when you want your passing gear, hill climb, towing, then on occasion you got to punch the thing, right? School bus it. Anyways, I'm just getting ready to put this on the motor. I might reconfigure this later. I just plugged these off because I'm not using them at the moment. And I've got one port left open on the back for the distributor is going to plug in on that one. Normally, this distributor, I think it's supposed to plug in on this one down here. And I think the reason for that is this is an off-idle. This is supposed to be like an off-idle port. So at idle, it reduces the vacuum. So there's less advance at the distributor. Or something, I don't know. But I've been putting it onto this one at the back. It doesn't make too big of a difference. This has a constant draw, even at idle. There's always a constant vacuum at here. because this is also where the vacuum brake booster would be. So there'll always be a vacuum pressure here at all times, regardless of throttle position. And so I'm just going to use that for the time being. I haven't had any issues with that, with my engine. I might retune my ignition timing back to what was supposed to be tune-up spec, which is 7 degrees before top dead center. Right now, I think I've got it set at about 13 or 14. And then I don't know the exact amount of mechanical advance, but I think I'm topping out just around 30. I know I dialed it in with an advanced dial timing light, and then just basically I just set it to one number and then dialed it in on the distributor till I got to the 0, till it read 0 on the damper, and then revved it up to 3,500 or 4,000, 3,000, 4,000 RPM, and watched and then used the dial on the timing light again, bringing the damper into 0 to see where my timing advance is at. And I haven't done anything to the distributor. That's the other possibility. There may be a miss. Either the ignition coil, ignition module, or just the distributor itself may be starting to wear out, and it may be requiring something to be replaced or rebuilt on the distributor. I might have to take the whole distributor out and rebuild it, which is not a big deal. Now, again, another thing I don't do, I don't take a GM HEI and suddenly go to an MSD or some other gimmicky off-brand that isn't GM. GM is always been factory built to a certain spec. Everything fits for the timing and the way everything moves. And there's no big issues. Understandably, with, I believe, Chrysler and Mopar, they had problems with improper distributors to the engines, and it wasn't quite geared and dialed right. And sometimes they had problems where the timing didn't stay consistent or something. I don't know. They had tuning issues. And the aftermarket guys who kind of went, oh, this thing's a piece of crap and it's got these bugs, knew how to debug the problem when they came aftermarket. But GM was one of those that MSD and all those other aftermarket guys couldn't really improve on that much. They claim to, but they don't. You don't need a multi-spark system for one revolution of firing power on an engine. That to me, that's just pointless. You can side gap, or even go a slightly bigger plug gap, and that will reduce your hydrocarbons and your emissions. So, anyways, I'm getting ready to plunk that on the motor here shortly, but I'm just doing a quick couple of comparisons. So this is an aftermarket because it's got just the steel rods. The Teflon's been taken off of it. This is a stock carburetor, has the Teflon coating. That's the green. This green coating on these rods is Teflon. The reason these are Teflon is so that way there's no friction between the throttle rods and the carburetor casting in the carburetor body. So that actually stops these from wearing out. As long as you don't get contaminated with dust and dirt, these things run forever. This is an aftermarket. This is a rebuilt. And another way to tell that it's a rebuilt, these little screws and fasteners look a little bit fucked up on this. They don't exactly look the best. But this is the carburetor that's going to go onto my motor. And I can live with that. It's not a big deal. I have... So, the way I had this one set up primarily, on the primary side, was, I'm just going to bump this down to low idle real quick, leave it so it looks like it's got the choke open. So while setting up the idle on the 350, I would just sort of cup my hand over top and check for either a sudden rise in RPM, which would be like a lean fuel mixture. If it's not getting enough gas, it will, when you cover or choke the motor, the idle will suddenly go up. And then when you go back to wide open choke, the idle will drop. And that's a lean condition. If it's running fat, like rich, too much fuel going through it, and then you go to choke it, the motor will lose power. It'll almost stumble and stall out if it doesn't get enough air. It'll start to choke itself. And there's a sweet spot in that. And I had to recently just, get a reminder, a little bit of a refresher. I had to watch some videos, and a guy showed how to make the adjustments. And he did something using a vacuum gauge. Now, I have a vacuum gauge in the dash, so I can tune this engine while I observe the vacuum gauge. So I'll probably be able to get that sweet spot and hopefully get it running into the right amount of vacuum pressure. In that sense, and see how that goes. And then hopefully I can get rid of the bogging problem. So right now the problem I'm having with this is mash it to the floor from idle, just from like straight from whatever 600 RPM, just sitting in park. It's not in gear. You would just punch it to the floor. And instead of it revving up, it suddenly goes bleh, and it just, sometimes it quits completely and then have to try to restart it. And other times, once in a while at a certain point, I stomp it to the floor, and then it stumbles, and it almost wants to stall, and then instead it's sitting there going bloop, 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 and then all of a sudden it'll start to rev up slowly, bloop, 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 and then bloom, and then take right off, and then I gotta take my foot off. So sometimes but other times in traffic, in gear, driving it hesitates. Sometimes it'll do a little backfire through the intake. That's also an indication of a worn cam and timing chain. Is another possibility. So I might have to just reduce that timing advance by just a couple of degrees, and that might correct it as well. But or I got to recurve my distributor just a little bit. And so there's a couple things I'm going to try out later on just to see what happens. I got another distributor I got to still yank off the small block. They're HEI, so the cap and rotor and possibly the guts are all interchangeable. And I'll check and see if that's going to be a worthwhile thing to venture into or not. Yeah. This carburetor is a little bit different in the type of jetting on this one in comparison to the type of jetting on this carburetor. So this one only has the two little jets coming out on the top, and then this one's got 4 on the just on the primaries. And I do have another carburetor identical to this one. This one I don't want to max this one out just yet until I do a little bit more checking. But this one is already maxed out. This one is already monster-sized. And I just got to do a little bit of work on it just to work out that friction right in there. So yeah, so I'm going to have a little bit of time with this one. Just to make another coffee here shortly. I got to get the doghouse buttoned up here shortly anyways, because it's getting freaking cold in here. And I don't want to light a fire in the wood stove just yet because I'm still dealing with a little bit of a gasoline issue with this one right now, because this one just came off the motor. And I got to get this one put away. I'll place it up in the front there where it can get the fresh air and it'll dry out over time. So I have 2 carburetors identical to this one. So this is an emissions carburetor. This is your fuel vapor, which would go down to a charcoal canister or to the fuel tank. This was just a vapor. This was a fuel vapor line, is all this was. And this one might be EGR. There was a certain port on a Quadrajet, not down in the lower part where the butterflies are, like this one. This port down here, this is an off-idle port. I believe this is supposed to be where the vacuum advance is supposed to hook onto this one. This one up here might be EGR, which EGR operates hot, not cold. And then this one over here, probably used for EFE, heat riser, like, or the one at the back, is your heat riser. This is your vacuum draw for your heat riser, and it's supposed to go to a thermal vacuum switch. So you have one thermal vacuum switch that's open, cold, closed, hot, and you got one that's closed, cold, and opens hot. And they're on the engine, but they're not in use. They're currently disconnected right now because there was a cruise control and a bunch of other bullshit into that, mixed into the whole situation. So I haven't fixed or figured it all out yet. Instead, I just kind of bypassed this and that, and I'm just keeping it basic. Just all it is right now is just carburetor to vacuum advance. The cruise control's disconnected. Vacuum gauge stays connected because it's connected actually to the same, it's on the intake manifold vacuum to the transmission, and again to the vacuum, directly to the vacuum gauge. So that's the trick to tuning that. I got another Turbo 400 tranny that's got to come out. That's going to get swapped into this one. That tranny is a $4,500 modified build that I had done about 6 years ago, and then haven't had the chance to really do much with it. I just barely broke it in before I broke the engine in my before my 350 broke down on me. I just never got around to fixing the 350. I just didn't care for it afterwards. I just went on to other things. I was insulating, winterizing, and all that stuff. Everything got cheaper. Gas got so much cheaper since the engine quit. Oh crap! This hose is cracking. So that's gonna be a bad spot for. Yeah. So I'm gonna take that off and change it. I cut up 1 or 2 hoses because I shortened all of this, but I didn't realize that this one here has got cracks in it, so I have to take that one off.